Acapulco, Mexico. This is Anarchast.
Hey everybody, welcome to another edition of Anarchast, your home for anarchy on the internet. I've got a first-time guest coming on. I've actually never even talked to him before, but I met him through someone else on Facebook and said I should talk to this guy. He's actually got a page on Facebook with about 5 million likes on it called Collective Evolution, which he's been doing for about 9 years, which I actually have seen the page from time to time, but I didn't know this person personally in the past. He's actually coming in from Toronto, Canada, probably freezing cold if I've been looking at the weather correctly lately. It's Joe Martino of Collective Evolution. A pleasure to have you on. Before we get started, though, Joe, and talk about what you're doing and what's actually going on in the entire world and what you talk about with Collective Evolution, first thing I got to ask, though, is how did you become an anarchist?
Well, for me personally, I look at anarchy as one of those things where, it's not only something within our systems and structures of our world, but also within ourselves, i.e., the idea of going beyond the need for governance, diving into self-governance, self-responsibility, all that sort of stuff. That happened to me probably about 10 years ago when I hit that point in my life where I was like, all right, I'm doing the same old, something's got to change. And that journey kind of led me into a ton of introspection, which made me think about, how I got to where I was in life, what was going on outside in the world that kind of never really resonated and felt right. And then all of a sudden I started to have to take responsibility for how I got there, how I was feeling, where my belief systems were coming from, all that sort of stuff. And through that, I kind of gained this idea of, why am I having, or why are we as a society having people that may not have our best interests at heart sort of govern and control so much of what we're doing, when I would love the opportunity to have, a society that's sort of built around self-governance with, leadership that is in touch with what, everybody wants. So just to be clear on sort of my definition, because I'm sure there's so many different definitions of anarchy and stuff like that, but for me, it's not this like big old negative scary thing that so many people talk about, and I'm sure that you would agree with that, but more so just the idea of individuals taking responsibility for themselves, their actions, both physically but also within themselves, mentally and spiritually, and creating a society around that.
Yeah, absolutely. Of course, I agree. I'm not gonna. I don't like those ideas at all. Yeah. So let's talk about what you do at Collective Evolution, how you started that, and what you talk about there. As I mentioned, you've been going for about 9 years, and just massive amount of likes on your Facebook. I don't know if you have anything else besides Facebook, but it's definitely a very big thing you're doing. So tell us a little bit about that. Why'd you start it? How it's grown so big, and what you talk about at Collective Evolution.
For sure. We felt that at the time, like going back to that moment 10 years ago where I kind of realized, all right, I need to start taking responsibility for my own life. It was like I was in college, I was doing what I was doing, not liking it, feeling down and out, and there was this picture of, I'm going to finish my degree, I'm going to go get a job, buy a house, and then basically just like sort of a mixture of making money / paying debt / starting a family for the rest of my life. And then I would just kind of die, and that was it. Like something didn't quite feel right. Like it felt like there was more possibilities to life. So going through that journey, I kind of actually went into this state of like depression, like, oh my God, this can't be all there is to life. And landed me in front of a counselor who I was talking back and forth to, and she said, hey, why don't you leave school if you dislike it so much? And I said, hey, that's a great idea. So I did that. And when I did that, it threw me on that whole journey like I was referring to, where I started looking at what was going on in the world, how things were happening the way they were, sort of who was involved in a lot of that. And then I started to say, okay, I'd love to, because along with all that came this sort of introspective spiritual journey that was happening at the same time for myself. So I kind of said to myself, all right, I'd love to put these experiences online, start talking about this, writing blogs, perhaps doing videos, that sort of thing. Let's start a website called Collective Evolution. And we had a couple of people around at the time that were, we were doing this stuff together, and we were just trying to like put this information online. It was really that simple. And then from a blog, it turned into more of like writing articles about what was happening. And then from there, it expanded into documentaries, and then almost like a full-out news network at this point. But we've also brought in like courses and all these sorts of things. But one of the keys to what we do that is sort of important in our eyes is the idea of how we come across things. Like I was mentioning before the show, there's like, sort of like the space between like, say, we'll just say, I don't like to use labels per se, but we'll just do it. But like you got the hippies, and then you got like Alex Jones per se. We love to just kind of sit in the middle, where it's like, we're bringing the truth. We're saying the things that need to be said, that are uncomfortable truths and that are uncomfortable topics to say it. But we're not talking about it's just pure love and light. But we're also not talking about it like everyone's about to die. So, that's essentially what we do.
Yeah, it's interesting how both sides do things so differently, but you're basically talking about generally the same thing. So, why don't you just tell us what in general is what you're trying to get out to people with collective evolution? Are you trying to get out truth in every single aspect of life? Are you focused more on spiritual, or are you focused more on financial, or are you just trying to get out as much as possible of real good information?
Yeah, I mean, for us, it's looking at as many aspects of everyday life or society that are relatable to people. So like if that means looking at, the economy, if that means looking at the insurgence of cryptocurrency, if that means looking at, things happening in the entertainment or music industry, if that means looking at politics, then, we're going to do that, and we'll bring a different perspective to it, because, that's how people relate to the world. And the perspective we bring helps us to question ourselves, be introspective, going back to the idea of self-governance, within ourselves. How can we, look at the situations, look at what's playing out in front of us in terms of our physical world, and say, how can we, shift this or have a different perspective or experience on it so that it's not so limiting, which is essentially kind of the world we're experiencing now. So the message we're getting across is creating change by shifting consciousness, which is really about shifting the way we see things, sort of taking a step back and saying, all right, what are we actually doing? How much of our political biases, our belief systems, our rigid ways of thinking, how much of that is limiting the potential we have of living what we want to live? That, would I say, was like kind of the underlying message of everything, but that of course comes across in very relatable terms as we look at each of the various topics that we decide to cover.
Yeah, definitely consciousness, raising of consciousness or awakening, all these are sort of same words for sort of the same thing. And I wonder, you started this about 9 years ago. How have you seen sort of, because I remember about 10 years ago, 15 years ago, all this kind of stuff that we're talking about, we haven't even talked about any of it yet, but you know what I'm talking about, generally this sort of stuff, is not many people knew this stuff, to me anyway. I didn't know anyone who knew a lot of this stuff, and no matter what it might be, whether it be more the spiritual stuff, or if it might be just understanding how the money system works, the Federal Reserve, or if it's, that vaccines may not be all that good for you, or that 9/11 may not have been some guy in a cave in Afghanistan who somehow stopped physics from working that day and knocked down 3 buildings with 2 planes or whatever it might be. A lot of this stuff just didn't seem to be that well known, and I don't know if that was I was hanging out with the different people, or that I wasn't going to the right places on the internet, but my general gauge is that there really is a lot of people waking up, and it's kind of funny because at the same time you just see so many people who are still so asleep that it can become a little bit depressing. When you walk around on the street, you kind of just see these people, it's like, oh my God, these people are still asleep. But so what's your take on it? Are we actually seeing like a real raising and awareness of consciousness out there happening, or is it just that the internet makes it so we can find those 5 million people that are across the world who happen to believe the same thing as we do?
I totally know what you mean on this, and it's one of those things where, I think it's, to be honest, a sort of a mixture of both from just like our own perspective, right? It's like, you are obviously going to, if you're liking all the pages you like, if you have the friends on Facebook that you have, and all these sorts of things, it's going to feel like maybe everybody around you is like awake and going through that sort of stuff. But then when you go downtown, or when you go to a public event and realize, whoa, it's not the same. So I think it is a mix of that. But I do believe there is a pretty dramatic shift in the way we're seeing things happen. Back in 2012, I had made a film called Collective Evolution 3, The Shift, and it basically looked at the shift that is taking place in the way we think, or in consciousness, however you want to look at it. But we used very, very, very real life examples, and we coupled that with some of what ancient cultures had said, as well as what was happening scientifically within the cosmos and how that affects human DNA. And we decided to bring it all together, looking at things like 9/11 as well, and seeing, here's all the events that are actually happening on our planet right now that is illustrating the change, the massive change that's going on, but also the massive change in the way people see things. Like never before, people are questioning things. Whether you look at the march against Monsanto, or the rise in people's interest in alternative health, or in looking outside of like what you could say is mainstream health, is huge. It's massive. It's quite possibly the most noticeable change that's out there. And that shift in people looking at health in a certain way begins to make them look at the rest of the world in a certain way over time. Like when you start to realize why the health industry ended up the way it is with food, with pharmaceuticals, all that sort of stuff, you kind of notice there's a bit of a corporate or elite-driven or sinister sort of agenda that probably makes its way into other systems and structures like finance within our society. And then all of a sudden you begin to awaken to everything else. So I would definitely say there is a shift happening. I do think there's a lot of people waking up in huge numbers. Do I still think it's like at this point where, you know, it's like everybody and it's like hit this critical mass? No, but I do believe we're getting a lot closer to that every single year.
Yeah, I have to say I think the same. It's really amazing to watch. Even the Anarchast, which is just coming up next month, it's doubled every year since we started. And it's not big numbers, of course, but it started as something I thought no one would even show up. And 4 years ago, 150 people showed up. The next year was 300. The next year is 600. This year's going to be over 1,200. So we're sort of seeing that as well, just, you know, and you can just sort of see it happening. And that was a great point that you brought up, that maybe some people find out about this stuff through health. So maybe their kid all of a sudden is talking funny because he had all these vaccines or something, and they're like, they'll get into it. They're like, what? You know, no one told me there's mercury and all this stuff in the vaccines. The government said it was fine. And then, you know, they go on, and I've actually had them on this program, Anarchast, so many of these sort of people that have come on from that aspect. And they're like, yeah, once I found out about that, I looked into everything else, and, you know, that you go down the rabbit hole, as they say. And that was the same thing for me. Actually, my rabbit hole moments, or the time that I first went down it, was finding out about the Federal Reserve through The Creature from Jekyll Island with G. Edward Griffin's book. And then the second one was 9/11, and that's what blew it wide open for me, because I was like, wait, they pulled that off on live television. Well, sort of live. It might have been pre-recorded, but they pulled that off right in front of everybody, and most people didn't even notice. And what else have they done? And that's when you look into like every war, and it's like, oh, what about the Vietnam War? Oh, the Gulf of Tonkin false flag attack. It's like, oh, and what about World War II? Oh, they cut off the oil supply to Japan, so they only had a couple days left. They knew they were going to attack Pearl Harbor, but they wanted them to get into the war. And then there was the Lusitania as well, and it's like, well, of course, you know, Iraq wasn't based on, or Afghanistan and Iraq, even though Iraq had nothing to do with it, and neither did Afghanistan, neither did Osama bin Laden. Anyway, we can go on and on. But yeah, it's like, you know, different ways that people go down this rabbit hole, but we now are seeing so many people going down that rabbit hole. So from your perspective, you know, is this just a natural evolution that eventually most people are going to end up waking up, or is there more that we have to do? I know that you brought up before we talked, or before we started the show, about how you're finding some of your advertising revenue has been going down, and this is what anyone who's trying to spread truth has been noticing, is that you're getting shadow banned, you're getting demonetized for sure. So where do you see in the struggle towards, you know, waking more people up? Where are we at with that?
Yeah, I mean, there's a number of interesting ways to look at that. I think that when you mention the words natural evolution perspective, you know, from a consciousness, sort of us changing the way our thinking goes, I do think that it is, I guess, I mean, to stay true to what I honestly do believe and what I presented in the film that I made in 2012, I do believe that it's partly seems sort of natural in the sense of like we're going through this shift, but I also do feel that, you know, humanity, if you look at it, has sort of had this curve of how it changed the way things happen. You know, it was very, I guess you could say, a steady upward climb, and now it's like massive. And I think the reason for that is when you look at what's happening now, or even the past, say, 10 years, versus what happened even like 100 and 200 and 300 and 400 years, you know, prior to that, the rate of change is dramatic. And I think the reason for that is we've almost hit this, and I always use this example, it's like we've hit this sort of like this end point within ourselves. And I'm sure so many of us can relate to this, which is probably why we get excited, for example, when we see the rise in crypto and what that could mean for our world. But I think we feel deep down, it's like, you know what? It kind of feels like we've been playing this same game over and over and over and over and over and over again. And like, regardless of what appears to change in a small scale, whether it be with technology or whether it be with a slight change in the way, you know, our city runs, nothing's really changing a lot, and we're kind of feeling unfulfilled. You get that feeling. You can almost see it across people's faces when you go downtown or you go wherever. It's like people just feel unfulfilled. And I don't think that's just because, the world is like this, as Alex Jones says, this prison planet per se. I think there's also something deeper that we know deep down, and this goes to the natural evolution part, that something needs to change, and it's got to be a way bigger than, a 4-year term of a new president who's going to bring about a few changes. It's something that's way, way bigger than that. And I believe we're in that phase of a massive awakening of people's consciousness, of the way we think, which will not only change our systems and structures, but the way we think of ourselves as human beings and what we're meant to do here on the planet. And that, I think, will bring about a completely different way of living. Now, how fast is that going to happen? I can't answer that question because I don't really know, but I do know that rate of change is happening dramatically, and there are a lot of factors that are happening to push that along, including things going on within the cosmos, for example. But yeah, I mean, I do think I think there was another part to the question which I'm not quite remembering at this time, but in terms of the natural evolution aspect of it, the advertising part, when you were saying some of the funding around people that are trying to spread truth. I do think it is happening. There is a little bit of sort of, you could say, blacklisting on certain social media networks to try and hinder certain things. But I also do believe that there's a lot of like Snowden type things happening where, Snowden was part of the NSA, who, many people, especially in the alternative community, might view the NSA or the CIA or the FBI as just like, pure evil institutions, quote unquote. And it's kind of like, but it's not quite how it is. There's a lot of white hats. There's a lot of people within those organizations that do want to make change. You can call them insiders or whistleblowers that end up coming out and saying things, or who are leaking documents to important people that are then pushing it to the media and helping to bring about information that otherwise wouldn't get out. And Snowden is one of those examples. He's actually a very good example of that. And I do think that regardless of what we're seeing and some of the limitations happening on alternative media and all that sort of stuff, I think at the same time, as part of the shift, as part of what's changing, you're going to see a switchover in power where enough of these people that are saying, I'm part of this institution, it's my job, but like I'm not going to keep supporting this agenda that's happening, and I'm now going to use my position and my knowing of what's available intel-wise to help bring out the truth. And thus, I do believe that although it may seem hard and may seem like a struggle sometimes for alt media, I think there's going to be like almost this switch where it's actually going to be super easy because the power struggle will sort of shift a little bit as everybody's like, oh yeah, we're actually ready to change here, and we're not going to continue with this old agenda anymore. So, it's a kind of a mix, but I totally do resonate with the fact that it is a little bit tough to do things in the current climate.
Yeah, life's kind of funny. I used to sail. I actually sank my sailboat, so I actually understand this quote very well. But there's sort of like an old sailing sort of a thing that says that sailing is 99% pure boredom and 1% sheer terror. And many things in life are kind of like that. And you pointed out that we're kind of have this like, it took a long time, slowly, over hundreds of years, people starting to wake up. It actually even happened a few hundred years ago. People were like, what do we need kings and queens for? And then the elites were like, oh, they're catching on to it. So now we'll say it's democracy and they're the government, even though we're just stealing all their money still. And they'll buy into it. And that's actually what's been going on for like the last 100 years. Yeah. And now people are looking at democracy and going, this isn't work. This isn't what we're not the government. They're just seriously just enslaving us. And so now they're like, trying different things and whatever. But I think that is sort of a natural sort of a thing in most sort of systems. Is it's slow, whatever, and then all of a sudden it all happens all at once. And so many people have these sort of things happen in their own lives as well. Nothing's going on. Everyone always says this. Everything just seemed to happen all at once. It's just for whatever reason. That's just the way life is. It might be energy. It might be how we're all connected and we're all doing things. So all those things all happen at once, or whatever it is. Or maybe that's the way the 3D video game that is potentially life was designed. Or whatever it is. I don't know what it is, but it does seem to all happen all at once. And if that's the case, and we can both see the trajectory is really going in a positive direction here at the moment, then we might be soon upon this moment in time where we have everything all happening all at once. And that's going to be pretty wild and crazy for sure. Do you have any sort of predictions on what might happen or how it could happen, or seeing how these things could potentially play out?
Yeah, I mean, I often say when people, because people have different perspectives, which is great. But as some people believe, like we've already sort of gone over the humps, and people are being like, wait, we're not even close. And I always like to say, there is what you could say a trauma that's coming regardless. And that trauma is the realization of how deep the manipulation really goes. Like a lot of the things we were talking about, 9/11 and the way our food system is and the way our finance and the slavery of, democracy, all that stuff, politics is all just kind of smoke and mirrors, that sort of thing. I do believe that is going to happen. And, like you mentioned, anything kind of goes through this curve where it happens and then boom, all of a sudden everything changes at once. I think what's really interesting about this time is that it seems as though that boom, everything's about to change really fast, is not happening in one or two sectors, but it seems like it's going to happen in almost everything that we do on the planet all at once. And what's so incredible about that is I think it's going to cause sort of this feeling within people of overwhelm, like holy crap! Like you were saying before when you were like, then I realized the Gulf of Tonkin, and then I realized, the Lusitania, all that sort of stuff, and then you're almost like you're overwhelmed with information about what's actually going on. And I think for a lot of people that may feel very traumatic. And I don't want to say that's like a negative thing, because I don't think it is. I don't feel it is. I feel it's a necessary aspect of what you could call an evolution that helps us to realize how important it is to maintain a level of what I'll call inner anarchy, which is this level of, we need to maintain a level of connection with ourselves, with what's going on around us. It's keeping responsibility for who we are, for how we think, for our actions and all those sorts of things, as opposed to sort of just putting our heads down, operating robotically, relying on governance and all that sort of stuff. And it's not to say, and through this, I don't want to suggest that it's like super negative, everything we've been experiencing. It's not about that. It's more so, that's what we did, great. You know what that looks like. Let's do something different now, right? And so I do think there is going to be, if I had to make a prediction to call it that, it's sort of like, I do think there is going to be this period of where everyone's just kind of like, oh fuck, I did not realize how deep that actually went. Whoa, but I think part of so many of us that have chosen the role to kind of wake up first, if you want to call it that, are going to be there to help people along and to bring them down to earth and say, hey, you know what, it's okay, here's where we can go and here's the directions we can take. So I think it kind of will all work itself out.
Yeah, it's funny, when I first started to wake up, I definitely wasn't in any sort of trauma. I've heard from so many people when they go through this waking up process that so many people say at first they're really depressed. And I actually had depression, but it wasn't for this reason. In fact, when I first found out about really 9/11, then looked into everything else, I was just enthralled. I was like, I knew it. I knew there was way more going on here than what I knew about. I just knew that, I sensed it, and now I'm finding the actual evidence of it, and I'm like, yes, this is awesome. So I'd look into it that way. But many people, and for whatever reason, it seems like a lot of people are really just averse to change, right? And they will almost do anything to avoid having to change, which to me is just bizarre, because I can't wait to change. I want to change every day. I want to be a different person every single day when I wake up. I want to be better in this and know more about that and change this. And if that means I have to go live in China, great, let's go do that. That's my personality, but a lot of people aren't like that. But what's really interesting, and I cover at the Dollar Vigilante the dollar collapse and how this is really going to affect a lot of Americans more than many other places, because they've been sort of they've had it so good for so long, with the dollar being the so-called de facto reserve currency, and when that goes away, they're going to realize how much of that was all kind of fake, and how hard life can actually be if you don't actually do things, work and you conserve capital and all that kind of stuff, instead of just going to the mall every weekend. And in many ways, but I go to the US and I see these people, and they are not happy. They're at the malls. They got like 50 shopping bags. You look into their eyes, they're dead. They just are not happy. They just keep buying stuff, like assuming it's going to make them happy or something. And in many ways, I talk about this. Like a lot of people go, man, what's going to happen to those people when all this, basically collapses and they become aware of what's going on? It might be the best thing for so many of these people, because you look at them, they're like 300 pounds overweight because they just keep eating because they're unhappy, and they're shopping because they think that's going to make them happy, and none of that's going to make them happy. And they don't even know what to do. And that's why there's so many people on antidepressants in the U.S., which actually makes you more depressed, makes you more suicidal, makes you shoot up schools on the very rare occasion that's not actually the CIA actually doing it. But it's like, that might be the best thing ever for so many people. So this is one thing I like to say. When I meet sort of people like that, I know they don't really know what I'm talking about, but they get the hint. Like, they'll go, oh, you're the dollar vigilante. You said the dollar's going to collapse. And I could see them kind of like shaking, like, oh my gosh, because my food and all the malls and all this. And I like to say to them, you know what? It might be the best thing that ever happened to so many people. They will get reconnected. They will have to, hey, who knows? Maybe they'll go out into the forest and take a walk and think about stuff instead of going to the football game and all that kind of stuff. So it is kind of like I think there's a positive and a negative to everything, and in many ways this is going to be a very, very positive thing, but it's going to be, as you pointed out, a little traumatic for some people. For sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And I gotta say, I entirely resonate with your experience of sort of like you were enthralled. I tell people all the time, it's like the moment I actually realized, because when I was a kid I used to say to my mom, I'm like, hold on, I'm watching the news and they're talking about all this death and destruction, right? And it's like, Ma, if all these problems, like they seem like, man created it. Like, didn't we create the systems around us? It's like, yeah, okay. So, don't we then have the ability to just uncreate it and create something that works? And she's like, yeah, well, it's not that simple. And, I like, as a kid, I'm like, I don't understand that concept. And, very, very similar to you, is like, I was depressed in school because of this idea of like, oh man, like, I can't believe this is it. This is not what I want to be doing in life. And the moment I started to realize that the Illuminati or that the elite, that the deep state, this stuff existed, and it's why the world was the way it was, i.e., if man created it, we could just uncreate it. Like, it started to all make sense. The greatest feeling of relief came over my body and my mind and everything. I was like, this all makes sense now, because there's no way we would be that silly to create something that is so destructive and does not make sense. There's got to be some sort of, someone pulling the strings for their own, whatever it is that they want out of it, right? So I totally resonate. It's a huge relief point, and yeah, I always say to people, what's happening is what it is. However you want to react to it, that's up to you and your experience and how you feel about it. But yeah, I do think, interestingly enough, the one thing I do mention to some of the people who are worried about the dollar collapse stuff too is it's like, if the dollar did collapse, let's say in all of the United States, or even if all, currencies just at once, just imagine all currencies collapse at once. It's not like...
It could be that, but like that, by the way.
It could be.
Yeah, because it will all happen at once. Even in the currencies, once they start to collapse, it will all snowball so fast, no one will even believe it.
Absolutely. And I say, it's like, well, if it's going to happen, it's not just going to happen to you. What happens to everybody around you. So although you feel like, oh my God, I lost everything that I built, so did everybody else, so it becomes irrelevant, right? Like, it's not like you're going to be in a worse off situation because you pretty much are in the same situation that everybody else is. Now, then you start looking at, and this is where I think the conversation gets interesting, because it's like you then start looking at the crypto side and you say, well, is that what's going to emerge as the next means of exchange if fiat currencies were to dissolve? Thus, if you're not invested in it, you may not have any. And so what's going to happen if that were to happen and then you have crypto, but you don't have any buying power to buy? It presents an interesting sort of odd issue around what happens if that were to happen and not enough people have crypto, what happens to them, right? Which I'm actually curious to get your thoughts on and how you may see that might go if that were to happen.
So the question is, now that I'm being interviewed, that if cryptos become sort of the de facto used currency across the world, what if enough people don't have access to it?
Yeah.
Is that the question?
What if there's not enough holders?
Oh, well, that's not a big problem. Like, all money, when it comes out, like the currencies, the fiat currencies, they start out like not in everyone's hands, right? It starts out in some people's hands, but those people do stuff in the economy, right? So very quickly, the money starts to just go out to everyone. So let's say there's a collapse of all the fiat currencies, totally going to happen in the next few years. And so and all of a sudden everyone's like, well, what do we use now? And then a lot of people are like, wow, this guy's using Bitcoin, and it might not even be Bitcoin the way that it's been lately, but Bitcoin Cash or Dash or whatever it is, or Monero or whatever. And like you said, most people get kind of wiped out, which is actually not that bad of a thing. Like, really, I'm a minimalist myself. Like, none of these material items ever has made anyone really all that happy for very long. The true happiness is actually all inside of you, and it comes through like the meditation and the consciousness awakening and all that kind of stuff. But most people don't know that. But you know, as people start doing stuff, so everyone be kind of wiped out. There'd be a period of time where it'd be kind of like a lot of people just walking around, like looking at stuff like, what just happened? And then, you know, some people would have Bitcoin, of course. There's already, you know, probably millions of people have Bitcoin right now, and they'd all of a sudden be very, very wealthy, and they'd want stuff, and they'd want to start rebuilding this new world. So they'd say, well, I've got a bunch of Bitcoin, I'm going to build a factory. They just spent $1 million worth of Bitcoin, even though dollars aren't worth anything anymore, but they spent like 20 Bitcoins on building a factory. Now those guys who built that factory all have Bitcoin. Now all the people who work at that factory are going to get paid in Bitcoin, but very quickly everyone's all got the currency. So that's actually not a major issue whatsoever, really.
Well, it's interesting. I see it from that perspective. I guess I was kind of like the idea of, you know, how long may that process take, and in that process, I mean, like I say, I trust everything would work itself out, but it's like within that process, you know, will you have the quote unquote feared, like, oh my God, everybody just is in panic mode and all that sort of stuff, which I always say too, it's like, if that were to happen, that's what happens. I mean, if that's the result of getting out of the system that we're currently in right now, I don't see that as such a bad thing, because if you look at our world today, it is complete chaos. It's just disguised as order, but it's really not order. It's actually pure slavery. Like, it's pretty crazy when you break it down.
Yeah, absolutely. And as far as where you want to be during the collapse, and this is, of course, what I talk about the dollar vigilante, so I've thought about this quite a bit. You know, you look at the tsunami in Japan, where people, their entire city was being washed away while they stood on a mountaintop and watched it all. And you barely heard, no one was screaming or anything. They were just kind of talking about it like, wow, there it goes. Yeah. And there was no looting, no violence or anything. That's because their society or their culture is more like that. Now, if anything crazy happened in the U.S., like we've seen the EBT cards or the welfare sort of cards go offline for a few hours in some places. There is riots and chaos like you can't imagine, because well, it's a very long story that we probably don't even have time to get into, but obviously there's not much culture there. They've been all sort of, actually Americans have been so attacked in so many ways. They've been dumbed down through the fluoride in the water, through the 12 years of government indoctrination camps and their Pledge of Allegiance. Their media is all propaganda. It's like North Korea, basically. And because of that, and they really take away from anything kind of like spiritual or anything like that, to the point where everyone, not everyone, but many people in the U.S. just feel totally unconnected to life. They're just getting their dopamine from, you know, football games, just short things, drinking some beers, and just go to the next thing, They're just so disconnected from everything. And when you have that, when you have all those people in a geographic region that are all like that, and not to mention many of them are now on, as I mentioned, antidepressants. I think there's 20% of women in the U.S. are on antidepressants. These antidepressant chemicals are incredibly heinous. Like they're zombify people. Not to mention they make them almost not even human after a while, because they really, that's why they start shooting up schools and stuff. You know, the actual, on the thing, it says, oh, one of the side effects of this antidepressant is suicidal tendencies. It's like, you know, and they have not had access to all the healthy things like cannabis or anything like that, right? We were just talking today. We were just down at the beach, and my friend from the U.S., actually Lou Kardowski, if we were changes here, and we were just talking, and we said, what was it? So a guy told me online the other day, he said, take a B12 vitamin injection once a week and you'll feel really good. So I sent my driver down to the pharmacy here in Mexico, and he bought it. And he came back, and I said, Luke, you want to do a B12 shot? And he said, where'd you get that? And I said, pharmacy. He said, oh, it's like illegal in the U.S. I'm like, everything that's actually good for you is illegal in the U.S. Like, it's just vitamins, right? Like, it's a vitamin shot, that's illegal. But you can take this. This is like a patented by a pharmaceutical company for billions of dollars, and they make hundreds of billions of dollars a year, and it kills most of the people that take it. You can take that, but you can't take a vitamin B12 shut. So, yeah, this all comes back to, where you want to, this actually is something that people should be thinking about even before the collapse, right? Why do you want to live around all these zombies, right? Like, that's why I live here in Acapulco, Mexico. Actually, another thing Luke said to me yesterday was, we were talking about how Facebook actually does things to affect people's emotions on purpose.
Yeah.
They will actually try to get you depressed or whatever by putting certain things in certain orders, and they watch how it all connects. And I said to Luke, I said, yeah, I only post on Facebook. I don't really go on it myself. I just use it as sort of like a business outlet or whatever. And I kind of mentioned that people in Mexico don't, at least this part in Acapulco, Mexico, don't seem to be even on that stuff. Oh yeah, he brought up Tinder. He said, no one's even on Tinder here. I said, no one really is on their phones. And we were at the beach and we looked around and no one was on their phones. Everyone was dancing and talking and laughing. And then Luke found one, about a 6-year-old kid, and he was on his iPad. He said, no, they got him already. And I'm like, yeah, okay, there's a couple, but they don't have them all. Whereas if you go to the US and you go anywhere, you go to a restaurant where there's families eating, everyone in the family's all looking at that black screen, right?
Yeah, it's absolutely crazy.
Yeah, so I don't know if who's interviewing here, but I don't know if that answered your question about the collapse. But yeah, it's going to be interesting times ahead, and people are waking up. It's one thing that I found really interesting is how this has all been kind of predicted by various cultures, and it all seems to be coming true right now. This is like the kind of weird, crazy part to me. Like, even the Bible has, what's it called? Revelations, I think it's called, where it basically predicts, what's going to happen. Or what's it called? But it's called the lifting of the veil. Do you know what I'm talking about? Is that the Revelation?
Yeah, well,
I think it's called
Revelations. I think it refers to the rapture, if I'm correct. The lifting of the veil, I'm not 100% sure where that may be from, but I know that in the film I was talking about that I made in 2012, where we essentially looked at the shift that is taking place. We looked at what ancient cultures were saying, and it's like all of them seem to be talking about this rough time now. The idea around quote-unquote 2012 became sort of hijacked in my eyes as this oh my God, end of times, all this sort of stuff. And there was some significance to the time of 2012 and sort of energetically, cosmologically, certain things that were happening. But when the inspiration behind the film was to look at what ancient cultures had said, what so many of them are talking about this exact time. Then you start to look at what's happening cosmologically, not only with sunspots and sunspot cycles and sun activity, but as well as various cosmic rays and their effect on human consciousness and what's happening in the cosmos with regards to that. And then when you actually look at the events that are taking place on the planet right now, it's insanity what's taking place. It's amazing to see how much is actually changing and how much is happening all at once. So I totally, when you look at from an ancient culture perspective or anything, it's totally clear that there is something going on. We refer to it as the shift, but to me, in my eyes, there's no doubt.
Yeah, I think it's the Revelations. I think the actual meaning of that is lifting of the veil. So even in the biblical sort of angle, and if you look at all the predictions of what's going to happen before the very end time sort of thing, the rapture, whatever they call it, that's all really happening right now. They say what's the capital of Syria? Off the top of your head?
No.
Damascus. So in the Bible it says Damascus will be on fire, and this is going to happen right at the very end. It's it's on fire right now. Yeah. And I don't know if they're doing it on purpose to copy the Bible, or if the Bible is already predicting it, or whatever. And then you go into the hippie stuff. You brought up hippies earlier. The Age of Aquarius, we're apparently in that area now, and that's supposed to be when everyone wakes up. Then you brought up the Mayan thing. That was 2012, which some people have done some numbers, and they say, it's actually because of the leap years, it's supposed to be like this year or whatever. But when you actually look back at 2012, we've been talking about how this stuff has really started to speed up. It was right around 2012 that, like I mentioned, about 10, 15 years ago, no one knew, this podcast we're doing right now, 15 years ago, if this was on the internet, we'd be labeled as crackpot crazies, weirdo hippie guys for even talking about this stuff. And now I can't get anyone who's even bats an eyelash at all this stuff. They're like, yeah, you didn't know that? Yeah, of course, everyone knows that. Yeah. So that was 15 years ago. So around 2012, it seems like everyone started to wake up. So maybe that Mayan thing was right. I don't know.
Yeah.
But it does seem like there's something going on, and you know, whatever's happening, it's you know, it's so interesting for me personally. Like one of the things I tell a lot of people is I don't watch television programming because it's called programming for a reason. But I don't watch movies that much either because first of all, I see all the propaganda in 90% of the movies. Like, it just, you know, call the president, and I'm just like puking, like trying not to puke as I'm like, oh my God, this is so ridiculous. Like, call the police, they're going to help us. And all just the minor propaganda that you can see in all, like, there's just propaganda in everything. And I just see that. To me, it's like that movie, like, Let Them, what is it, Live or whatever?
They Live.
Where... Yeah, They Live. Yeah, I've always got those glasses on, so I'm just always like, I don't want to. This is ridiculous.
Yeah.
It's stupid for me to watch this. But at the same time, the other part of it is I always tell people, I'm like, why are you sitting there watching this movie about, and you think it's so interesting about, oh, look what this is happening and that's happening in the movie. It's like, are you paying attention to what's happening right here on Earth right now? This is freaking wild. Like, so to me, it's like, why would you watch a movie when you can just kind of pay attention to what's going on in life?
Yeah, it's so fascinating. And you know, even to talk about the idea of, you know, 10, 15 years ago, how people didn't talk about certain things. It's like I was doing a little talk last March, actually. It's coming up again. It was Conscious Media Festival, and it was around the idea of consciousness, the word consciousness and conscious media, and like what that looks like. Is even for us, we refer to our what we do as conscious media for the most part, although it kind of falls in the alternative side as well. But it's conscious media in the sense of like it's more than just about just picking a political side and aggressively going after it, sort of thing, right? Which is very common in media. But looking at the word consciousness, I was saying it was like, you know, 10, 15, or even 9 years ago when we started, the word consciousness was like exactly like you were saying. Everybody saw it as like, wow, you guys are like way off in the new agey, hippie sort of movement sort of thing. Like, I can't even take this seriously. As soon as you say consciousness, all they think of is pseudoscience. And it's like, wow, like, okay, you know what I mean? That's what it was like. And then a few years later, it was like a lot more accepted. Now, consciousness is like such a mainstream word in a lot of ways. Not everybody kind of has the same definition of it, but it's very, very understood and talked about in a very different way. And, you know, given some of our contacts in Hollywood and stuff like that, there are scripts, there are TV shows, movies, and that sort of stuff, all based around the idea of consciousness that are currently sort of tabled, where these studios are waiting for the right moment when humanity's sort of more ready to start making these films. And I think it'll really popularize. And now it's difficult to say what direction they're going to take, because I know there are some studios that obviously are not just pumping propaganda, whereas other studios are. So it's like, it's difficult to say what angle they're going to take, but it's clear that the conversation and the awakening, even over the past 9 years, has changed so much that even words and the way we understand things has dramatically changed. And to be able to kind of see that, like, just even personally, like going from like 9 years ago, like, wow, like that was like pseudoscience, to now it's like, yeah, of course, like, duh, you know what I mean? It's like, it's amazing.
Yeah, I remember saying things in conferences like 6, 7 years ago that everyone in the whole room, their jaws would drop. And like, I'd hear people talking after the conference like how crazy that guy was. and now I can't even, there's nothing I can say that really kind of like shocks anyone anymore. It's not like I'm trying to shock them, but like everyone's sort of caught up so much on at least hearing these sort of things. They might not totally agree with it. They might say, oh, I'm not sure about 9/11 or whatever, but they've at least heard that there is an alternative theory out there than what you're getting on the news, right? So yeah, it's really interesting times. And I guess we'll just see what happens. It's, you know, for a lot of people out there that say like, oh, I'm bored or whatever, it's like, oh, why are you bored? This is like the most incredible time that I know of in human history. Like, if you think about it, like 100 years ago, we didn't have, well, we barely even had power, right? Like, let's say 200 years ago, didn't have power, didn't have running water, didn't have like indoor toilets, definitely didn't have television and radio, not that that's of much value for anything good, definitely did not have the internet, of course, and now we walk around with like, where's my phone?
Yeah.
Anyway, whatever, we walk around with a thing this big, and it's got all the information that's ever been out there in the history, that, as far as we know it, of this earth, all in your pocket. And you know, a lot of people still use it just to watch cat videos, right? But you know, it's just such a fascinating time. So Yeah, it's going to be interesting. I will definitely be following it on Collective Evolution. Of course, a lot of people will be following what's going on in the financial with the Dollar Vigilante on my stuff. And the whole other angle is the freedom aspect, right? So here at Anarchapoko and Anarchast, we're just, a lot of people are waking up to that. Like I remember 20 years ago, not 20, but like 15 years ago, the word libertarian, I had never even heard that word before. When someone told me that word, I didn't even know what it meant. I thought they meant liberal or something. And when they told me anarchist, that word, I thought they meant people who throw bombs and break Starbucks windows. So, and most people now actually know that's not the case. Like not everyone, but like it's everything is happening so fast now. So is there anything that we haven't covered that you wanted to get into? And if not, why don't you just let people know about Collective Evolution, where they can find out more information, and anything else you want to let them know about? Because if we just keep talking, we're just going to keep talking forever. So, and everyone's got ADD nowadays. So
gotta keep the episode short.
Yeah,
I totally feel you on that. Actually, I just came from shooting a 15-minute video today about sort of that whole Oprah situation and the way alternative media responded to it. And it's actually an interesting video, but I was panicked about the fact that I'm like, oh my God, 15 minutes, no one's going to watch this. Yeah, I mean, I feel like we covered a bunch of interesting things. I like the fact that we were able to go over so much of what's happening, even from a consciousness perspective of what's changing. So that's exciting to me. People can find out about us, if you remember, collective-evolution.com, go to it. If not, Google Collective Evolution, where the first results on everything. You'll be able to find our YouTube, our Facebook. We have a podcast called the Collective Evolution Podcast, which we release weekly episodes as well. And we do daily news, all that sort of stuff, tons of articles. So there's lots of different areas. We're on Instagram as well. So there's plenty of ability to kind of use your phone to follow what we're doing. But yeah, we're putting out there, we're utilizing these tools and the internet and Facebook and all these sorts of things to help make the world a better place. So that's what it's all about.
That is what it's all about, and we'll put the links to that all down below. You can check all that stuff out and definitely check it out. And that's it for Anarchast, your home for anarchy on the internet. Peace, love, and anarchy.
In a world where Antifa riots in the city streets, cops rage out of control, and the leader of the free world is a fat-ass casino owner, one event stands alone to make anarchy great again.
I actually love humanity. That is why I'm an anarchist.
Backwards in the building like we the ceiling, we illin'. No matter who find it appealing, I'm here and I got a feeling that we'll be dealing a lot of pain with a penicillin get drilled in your head. That we are monsters and yeah, we come from the slums, and for months we've been pumped, but for once I am now comfortable. I want to grow, I want some more success, and I want to know that greatness can't be rushed, can't be lost, so face the bus. Feel free to hate on us, we lace them up. Dudes, we done paid them up. Keep snakes away from us and safe from us, you might wanna be. Remember when clowns used to make fun of me and now they wanna be me, see me and they run at me. I'm gonna be the greatest, yeah I wanna be, but I am not the one to be the fakest for the sake of being played. I'm here, like I never left, said to hell. Nah, cause I can't just fail, so just prepare your ears, it'll get for real. Okay, from here, we will never take the sale, it's quiet time. My mind and my thoughts, my highs and my faults, my wins and my loss. When will I fall off? It's a test for me. You are now listening to Veracity. Yeah.
Fuck the media, fuck the banks, fuck drone strikes, fuck tanks, fuck hunger, fuck war, fuck ignoring of the poor, fuck the left, fuck the right, fuck the government. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you.